Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is The American Homefront, Part 2. So, we're going to talk about 5 terms or themes that, as you read more about what Americans endured during this period, you can kind of use them as a way of better understanding some of the source material that you're engaging with. All right, let's get into it. So, the first term is USO. So, the USO was and is, because they still operate today. So during World War II, the USO provided spaces for service members, often men, but service members to come to. So you've got nearly 10 to 12 million people who are going to be in the service during World War II. You're going to have men who are deployed all over the country, spaces they don't know very well. And so the idea of a quote unquote safe or moral space, an acceptable space where the idea was that you could go, you could have some entertainment, maybe get a sandwich or a cup of coffee or a donut. Maybe you could, write a letter. Maybe you could, get some help with something if you needed. But also there would be, of course, hostesses. So this is young women who would be junior hostesses, women who would be considered senior hostesses. So there's a class element to this, a racialized element to this. There's a gendered element to this. Who were supposed to be spending time with these servicemen. But again, the USO was a big part of this process. So there would be dances and there would be events, and this was supposed to be an okay space for the servicemen to go to. So again, the USO, although it still exists today, right, is this really, really incredibly important process and part of, kind of the home front experience for many service members. All right. The second term for us is going to be censoring. So today, in our age of complete and utter and open access to information, the idea of forms of censoring would be difficult, and it is difficult to operate with, given what the technology that we have, even with our smartphones and that kind of thing, can do. But during World War II, of course, there was an incredibly important necessity of making sure that you weren't engaging in letting out information that would give aid to the enemy. And so a part of the process of things that would be published in newspapers, because again, you're dealing with an era of newspapers and radio and film, not yet television, but letting information out was incredibly you didn't want that to happen. So soldiers especially needed to censor themselves, in terms of their unit and where they'd be deploying to and when was that going to happen, and the process or circumstances under which that was going to occur, right? All of this stuff, they did not want information to get out. So you had to, of course, if you were a soldier writing home, there was the knowledge, of course, that somebody was going to be looking through your mail, making sure that certain things weren't getting out, because they didn't want, any kind of, sort of any kind of information being able to get to the enemy. So the idea of censoring existing as a part of the process for those on the home front, that is certainly something that folks would, have been aware of. The third thing for us to be aware of is Japanese internment. So at the beginning of 1942, President Roosevelt issues an executive order that orders Japanese Americans, not necessarily not in Hawaii, but primarily on the west coast of the United States, although some were from Hawaii, to be interned in a series of internment camps. Now, this is tens of thousands of individuals, and they're going to be forced out of their homes and businesses because of sort of concerns about sabotage, concerns about violence on the part of Japanese Americans against the U.S. as the war against Japan was beginning. Now, there was challenges to this. The Korematsu Supreme Court case would be the best example. Although the Supreme Court basically overruled and supported the internment, we need to, of course, acknowledge, and President Reagan did in the 1980s, of the racialized nature of this, the biased racialized nature of this. But the process of the internment, the process of bringing these individuals to temporary centers, then to eventually these camps, was a very difficult process for individuals to endure. Another term for us, of course, is going to be segregation. So we need to recognize that although the U.S. is, of course, fighting against these very brutal forces during World War II, you still have, throughout much of the United States, racialized segregation that was enforced across communities. And this was quite on display, especially for veterans who are going to be and service members who are traveling into different areas. It is the post-war era where you're going to see movements far more towards desegregation. And there were those who spoke out against this, during the Second World War, but we need again to acknowledge the realities of racialized segregation. Last term is Rosie the Riveter. So, of course, part of the process that we're also going to see during this war is the active efforts on the part of women to be involved in industrial sites in many cases, and in these kinds of workforces. And the imagery, such as the posters of the time, which supported these women, were a big part of the process in understanding kind of how, kind of communities and all could get involved. Thank you very much.